I guess. Morning. Okay. Hi. How's it going?
All the core work is done.
Yeah, yep. It's time for that final project kickoff. Usually, a lot of my lectures, I like to start being like, let's talk about what we've learned as it is relevant to the thing I'm talking about. And today that's like, so how was the entire boot camp up to this point? Huh? Huh? It's all coming together. So, what we're going to talk about is the final project kickoff and what that means. We're going to kind of talk about the timeline. We're going to talk about project kind of ideation and planning. And was there a transit thingy today? Sky Translate? Buses on fire? Nothing? All right, cool. Just wondering. And then we're going to talk about project ideation planning and there was one more thing I was going to talk about. Yeah, which is basically how to do anything new. All right, so final project. This is the time you guys get to pair into teams, or pair. You get to group yourselves into teams of whatever size you need. Any size greater than 1. And we have not yet had an entire cohort form one team, but it would have to be a pretty magnificent project at that point. Actually, we have had one cohort become one team. That's because it was the iOS cohort, and there were 4 of them, and that makes some sense. Yeah. So your timeline is that the big thing that's going to happen is that in 2 weeks from tomorrow is demo day. Right? You're going to have an employer-only demo day in the afternoon where you present to employers. You're going to have a demo day that's open to the public where you present to your friends and family, assuming that you have friends or family that still wants to acknowledge you. Still it can and wants to acknowledge you. Yeah, let's go split screen. Okay. So that is the big thing. Generally speaking, the way you kind of want this to work is that, generally speaking, every process has kind of a few steps, right? There's planning, there's design, there's development, the actual making. I don't know why I'm yelling for all these. Let me just... So, project steps. So there's planning. What are you going to make? What is it going to be? You're going to have design. What is it that we're actually, like, how does this thing look? What are the steps of it? From a software standpoint, what are we going to do? What are we going to include? There's the development. There's sort of testing. And then there is, you ship it. Whatever that means. This time it's going to be you present it. If this were a real product, you would actually like deploy it or you would do something, right? So these are kind of your big steps. And part of the shipping for you is going to be planning a presentation. Because that's what you're doing. You're making something to present. Yeah? So we're going to talk a little bit about, like, this is the eventual goal here, demo day. So we're going to kind of talk about each of those steps. I will sort of say that if you are not coding by Friday, you are not behind. right? You remember Don's whole spiel about you're not ready to code yet, right? Did he give you a midterm? Yeah. You're not ready to code yet. And it's an important thing to hear and learn and remember because coding, wanting to code and wanting to make code, I mean, it's a good thing to learn to do, and we've been learning to like make code for its own sake here. But when it comes down to it, coding for its own sake is actually a real liability out in the field. Writing code you don't have to, or writing code that doesn't have a purpose is a waste of time. And you guys don't have that much of it, right? So it's really important to know what it is you're going to make and how it is you're going to make it before you start just typing something. I've been a part of teams where it's like, well, this feature, like especially in school, where it's like this feature, this feature, this feature, and be like, we never talked about how those features actually come together. So it's so easy to make a bunch of code that then you have to scrap, or make a bunch of code that then nobody else can work with, right? So yeah, we're going to talk about that. So yeah, so planning should be sort of like is going to be figuring out what you're going to make, making lists of features. So we're going to make like in the big idea, like, hey, we're gonna do a thing. We're gonna make Tinder for dogs, right? And then you figure out, like for dog breeders to put their dogs to make new dogs, not for like dogs themselves. I can't remember which way you swipe. I never actually got to use a dating app like that. I just feel like I just met a person in real life before that happened. I don't know. So I don't know which swipe is the right swipe, or the I like you swipe, or the never mind swipe. Anyway, it's not the point. So right, so you're gonna figure out what you're gonna make. You're gonna have kind of features, and when we say features, it's gonna be like, oh, there's a chat, or there's a thing, there's a this page, there's a this page. It's sort of like that. You are going to want to sort those into two categories: core and stretch. You want to have your MVP, and then have something. You want to have stretch goals. Stretch goals doesn't mean we're never going to do it. Stretch goals means, hey, once we've accomplished the main thing, we know how to add these on, right? So this will help you figure out if your MVP is like something you can accomplish in a week. That's not a bad thing, because then you can like add more interesting stretches onto it. So the feature is going to be MVP and stretch. You're going to figure out your stack, and you're going to figure out rules and timelines and that sort of thing, right? Generally speaking, when splitting up work, there are two big directions that you can do things, which is, we kind of call them horizontal and vertical. And horizontal means that if you think about your app as just layer on top of layer on top of layer, horizontal means we're splitting this up so that one person deals with one type of technology and the other person deals with another type, right? So let's say I'm going to form a team. It's going to be me, Jen, and Chibwe, right? So and let's say we're making Tinder for dogs, all right? Cool. So a horizontal split would be, hey, I'm going to work on like database and kind of the data calls, and then like talking to an API, and Chibwe is going to work on the server, and Jen's going to work on front end. Or I'm going to work on the server, Chibwe is going to work on the web, and Jen's going to work on the React Native, right? Or like whatever we do. So it's basically we are splitting up by technology. So by technology. And then vertical is actually features, which basically says that one person owns a feature from top to bottom. I own the swiping, right? and swiping right. And so I'm going to make that front end, and I'm going to make the server calls, and I'm going to make the database that links to. Or I'm going to not necessarily make the database, but like, because we might decide on an ERD first, but you know, do that set of calls. I might, and you might find it, so like, yeah, by feature. And just to be fun here, you're not ready to code. I will say with Stack, though, there might be a little code in here just because you may work with things that you're not familiar with. Hey, we actually want to have a map feature so you can see where those, like you had a few people who are like, yeah, I like them, they like me, like our dogs should intermesh, however dog intermeshing works. And that is like, okay, well, we have a map component. Oh, okay, well, we have to figure out how to use Google Maps, which we haven't done. So you may have to figure out, identify technologies you're not familiar with. And we can kind of talk about, like, part of the planning would be, well, how difficult is it going to be really? And this is one of the hardest things that we have as developers to estimate, is that it's really easy to estimate a thing that you've done over and over and over again. It's easy to estimate how long it is going to take you to make, like, the 4th web page of a website that you have already been working on, right? Like, the first one took however long, and the second one was this long, and the third one was this long, and I guess now I know how long it's going to take me to make this last page. It becomes a lot easier to estimate at that point, right? So, yeah, I will talk about how to integrate technologies you're not familiar with, but it's good to find those and figure out, like, what you'll be able to do with them and how much effort they're going to be. So, we're not ready to go. Design. I really recommend, personally, starting with, you're basically going to be designing 2 things. You're going to be designing the user experience, kind of all of the flows, all of the ways that people can kind of get into your site, and then also the architecture, right? And so the UX and the architecture. You're basically deciding, like, what you're going to make and how it's all going to fit together, including, are we going to have kind of a socket server? Are we going to have a web or an HTTP request response kind of server? That sort of thing. Yeah, I think Chandra is now seeing that thing is weird. All right. So, we then have development. I think we all know what development looks like, but it also looks like checking in with each other. And a really important part of this is being honest with each other. Not just not lying, but being willing to say, like, hey, actually, this is taking me longer than I thought it would. Hey, I'm having a hard time with this. Hey, can we get some help on this? Hey, I think we need to have this, right? A big part of any project a big part of any team is trust, and a big part of any project is, like, being able to say, like, hey, this is taking me longer than I thought it would, or this is taking me less time than I thought it would, and just kind of, like, being ready to step into different roles as that happens, being able to adjust. You don't know everything from the plan's important, but also there's a military axiom, which is that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So, like, as that plan is going, you're going to have to shape and you're going to have to reshape kind of what happens. So you're going to get to decide, like, as you go on, how are we doing on delivering our core features? How are we doing on delivering stretch features? So being honest with each other and like practicing good development discipline, which is everything that we had on that first go, right? That is things like, so crinkly. That is everything like, don't coat on master. That is things like, hey, stick to the plan. Make sure you make what it is you said you'd make. This is, if you develop a contract between you guys, make sure to actually meet that contract in terms of like, because an API, like an HTTP server is an API, it's a contract, right? A user interface is a contract between the user and the actual app, state of the application. Yeah. As you're going, you're going to be kind of testing it. I recommend, especially if you're doing Rails or stuff like that, if you can implement a feature test, if for no other reason than to say like, oh, we did a feature test. So like, if you change or refactor code, make sure everything still works. Don't be surprised on stage. Yeah, and then ship. In your case, the ship is not that you're making a product, right? The ship is you are presenting. So you always have to work with presentation in mind. Presentation, and this means a couple of things. One, and I hesitate to say this, but when you do a presentation, you are not actually, that is not the product. The presentation and the product are very different things. You are making a product as if you were making a product, but when you present, what you are giving people isn't, hey, we made this thing, it's now your thing. You are selling the experience that they will eventually have if they were to use your what's it, right? So you also have to present, you may have like a lot of, for instance, fake data that makes it look like you have 1,000 users who are all posting stuff, right? That would not be a good thing for you to do if you were actually producing something. Making a lot of fake data for an actual app would be bad news, but it's not bad news for your presentation. So that is technically a lie. That it's not a lie in that, hey, if everyone was using this, this is what this would look like, right? So sell the kind of potential experience. You may have little like shortcuts to log into things. That's okay too. You don't have to register the people right there online. So little shortcuts to move along the state are okay. Make sense? Like, kind of having a /backdoor/1 to sign in as user 1. Things like that. That's fine for your presentation. Yeah. And eventually one of the things you're going to have is, so while you're going, you're going to want to be making screenshots, and you're going to want to be like kind of capturing, hey, this is what this does, maybe making a video together of what it should do, and that, so kind of for, as a portfolio piece, you want to kind of capture screenshots and make a good README. So README, screenshots, demos, that sort of thing. Okay, so that is the high level, this is what's happening. And you should not be, like in the last few days before demo day, you should not be making changes. You should just be ready to present and making this presentation worthy. That is not the day to put in more features. maybe on a branch, but make sure that there is a presentation that the master branches are ready to present. Okay, project ideation and planning. Right, so the way I see it, when you're picking a project or picking features for a final project in Lighthouse, there are 4 reasons to do anything. There are 4 potential reasons. All right. Those 4 reasons are, I am so right? Number 1 reason to do something is because you're amazing and everyone needs to know. Everyone needs to see it. All right? So this is where you put in things like, hey, I'm going to talk to this API. I'm going to put in some OAuth. And I'm going to connect to this thing. Like I can do this coding. I can do this thing. I can make it like, look at the animations I can put in. I can make this I can make this beautiful, and I can use all these things. And look how it like shrinks down to this when it's responsive. And man, I can do some things. Next reason is what I call resume-driven development. Which is you just have a checklist of like technologies that you want to say that you have used. React Native, check. OAuth, check. JSON Web Tokens, check. Image compression, check. Why not? View, check. Check. Python, sure, why not? Check. Speech recognition API. Yeah, let's throw that in. Why not? Check. Right? And that's mostly so that you now can say that you have worked with these technologies and you will not actually be lying. The third reason is that you have cracked the code. Like you have figured out exactly how to solve a specific problem. Maybe I'll say it. You have solved a real human problem. Like this whole dog breeder thing was just a nightmare. But now you figured it out. You put it all together. And now we've figured it out, right? That is, so if you have like a great user experience to solve a real problem, present that. That is awesome. That's what you're actually going to be doing, right? The fourth thing is solve a real problem. I am passionate about the topic. If you really love astronomy and it's just something that's really interesting to you and you make an app so that anyone based on their geolocation can know which constellations are above them and where they should be, and it's just something that you like really love, pointing that out, your passion is going to show in every line of code. Your passion is going to show in the experience that's created. And your passion is going to show in the presentation. And being able to take your passion and make it into an actual thing is important. That means that, hey, when I'm motivated, nothing stops me. I can make what I'm motivated to do into something. Those are the 4 reasons to make any project or any feature. When I make projects, especially about the solving a real human problem, I'm going to share with you, like this is not just my final project bit. This is my how I make projects anytime ever bit. How I make things that people will actually like and God willing actually pay some money for. Right? It's a really simple formula. Who? Why? What? How? Everyone say who? Everyone say why? Say what? How? Who, why, what, how? So who is identifies stakeholders. Now notice I didn't say shareholders. This is stakeholders. A stakeholder is someone who, like, it's not just your business people, it's not just your users, it's like everyone who is involved, who is going to be affected by what you make. So if you are making, again, dog tinder, then you're going to start with people who want to breed dogs and what their difficulties are in finding other dogs. You're going to want to identify who your business partners are going to be. You're going to want to identify any advertisers that might, any people in this business, in this industry who are going to be affected by this. You may want to start thinking about like this whole web, a network of people that are affected by this. You might want to think about different people at different states. Like you have, when we talk about often identifying user personas. So being like, this is Charlie. Charlie is, then we start saying some really specific things about Charlie. Charlie is 32. Charlie is an accountant. Charlie lives in kind of the West End of Vancouver. Charlie has a cute little Pomeranian. A little male Pomeranian. And he wants to spread that seed everywhere. So, like, you start to build up this thing about like who Charlie is, and you start to like develop more personas of different people that might be on different levels, right? You may have someone who's like, look, they just, you know, you may start developing these ideas like here's the people who are going to be affected. Here's our potential users, and you sort of do that market research. Maybe if I'm actually doing something, I go and talk to somebody. I go and talk to someone who breeds dogs. I go and talk to someone who. If I was making a big game, I'd talk about people who like, you know, my friends who are the kind of people that would play a game at a party. Like talk to them about what they would like. Talk to them about what they like about different games that they've played and what they'd like to do. You know, just kind of keep that going. Talk to them. My wife and I were talking about doing a recipe app to keep track of kind of our food planning. But we started talking about when we talk about our pain points in the food planning, and like we're two really good examples because has a lot more ease in the kitchen than I do, and I am kind of distracted, and like so for her she'll often make these like really, you know, kind of like many part meals and then be totally tired, and then the kitchen's like crazy afterwards, and then I'm like I just want to take a thing that we kind of already made and then sort of like just cook it and maybe put some veggies on and then eat that and then I'm fine. And so we start talking about that process between the two of us, and what we did was we sat down in a coffee shop and gave each other user interviews. And my user interview format was actually really simple. And I was sort of making it up as I went along, but this seems to work for me. And you can do more research on this. It was, what do you like? What don't you like? And what would you, kind of very similar, what would you like this app to do for you? Like, what would you like it to fix, but what do you want to keep? Like, in other words, what would you like to change, and what would you like to stay the same? Because those aren't exactly the same questions, right? So for me, I would like it so that we don't have as much food waste, right? You end up making a bunch of food, and then we don't end up eating it, and then it's just like we end up throwing away. And so we kind of talked about that. Or like, I want something that reminds me to like, if I have some stuff in the freezer, to actually take it out of the freezer. There's been times where it's like, hey, I'll make dinner, what's in the meal plan? And it's this thing, and I realize that our food is frozen. And it's just like, we're not eating that. So, yeah, like basically, what would you like to change? Stay the same. So that's their who, and that's also kind of like once you've identified them, and you identify this in the user interview, like what those people want. Then you're finally, after all of that, you're ready to make the what. You're ready to actually say, like, okay, so what would this look like? We talked about wanting to have reminders. Does that mean we have to figure out something like we'll send events or send notifications on a phone to say, like, hey, by the way, don't forget to wake up early and do this thing. By the way, you have this coming up. Would it have calendar integration? Would it have, like, what would it have? Would it talk to an API? Would it do this? So you start to identify features prioritized by a pretty simple formula, value value given divided by resources expended. So this is going to be the same thing when you guys are talking about features. You should prioritize easy features that are big wins, right? If you have something where it's just like, actually it's just we have to include a library, but it gives us everything we need, then do that. But if it's like, well, this provides some use to some people, but it's a really big, like it's a really difficult thing to implement and it has a lot of moving parts, okay, maybe put that one at the back of the list, right? You want to be able to kind of provide the greatest utility. Yeah. And then we figure out, this is the coding part. This is the coding, this is the assembling, this is the everything else part. Yeah. So this particular thing has set me in good stead and it continues to set me in good stead for the rest of my projects. I was working for a company that was building an analytics thing, or they said they were building an analytics thing, but it seemed like all of our features weren't that at all. All of our features that we were actually on the list seemed to be like a social business platform. You know, there's like messaging and events and groups and things like that. It was like Facebook, but for within your business. And we got a product manager. And we know there's a product manager and a project manager. We'll get there in a second. So the product manager, their role is to sort of like, they're sort of in the middle between the business owners, the project managers and coordinators, which are all about like timelines and getting this done when, the designers / developers, so that everyone that does that, and then they also kind of like talk to the end users and be like, hey, what do you actually want? They're the ones kind of doing the how, the who, why, what, figuring out stuff, right? And the product manager was like, at one point was like, hey, what do you think it is we're building? And I was like, a social business platform. She's like, well, no, it's actually supposed to be an analytics platform. And I was like, okay. And the next day, there was like, okay, there's this thing, but we'd also had a scrum where we had decided the features, and all the features put on were social business ones. And I said, okay, so I grabbed the product manager, brought her over to the wall with all the Post-it notes. And I was like, okay, so you say we're building an analytics platform. She's like, yes. I'm like, do any of these things have to do with an analytics platform? She said, no. I was like, okay. Then I brought in the CTO. And I said, okay, she says we're building an analytics platform. Is that what we're building? And he says, yes. I'm like, okay, do any of these have to do with an analytics platform? And he said, no. No, they don't. And a big part of this process of really narrowing down the what based on this other stuff is that it's really easy to spend a lot of time building the wrong thing. And I'm a lazy developer. I don't want to code. If I'm going to code, it better be for an actual reason. I don't want to code for just to draw a paycheck, right? I want to actually be building the right thing. And this is kind of a big part of that. And I find that this process really lets me accomplish this particular goal. Aim small, miss small. So has anyone ever heard this phrase before? Yeah. It's actually a phrase used by snipers. And the idea is, as I've heard it described, is that if you aim at a shirt and miss the shirt, you miss the man. If you aim at a button on the shirt, you may miss the button, but you'll hit the shirt. If you have a very clear idea of what it is you're trying to make and you go to that goal, even if you miss it, you're like close to that goal. If you are just being like, I kind of want to make like a thing maybe, then A, you've already made it, congratulations, and B, you have nothing to show for yourself. Like, you're going to keep on putting on effort that's not really going to pay out to anything because you don't know what you're making. So knowing what you're making is a really important part of this. Yeah. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a coffee break. And we will be back. And we're going to talk about how to evaluate technologies and how to put them into your for the love of the Almighty. Okay. All right, let's keep. Okay, so we are back, and so here's two ways we can go with the second half, right? I've kind of covered the main bunch of stuff to know. Main set of stuff you're going to do for your project. A little bit about how to figure out what to do for projects when you're actually making them for people. So I want to talk about the what am I trying to say? I want to talk about this one specific thing, which is how to include a new technology or feature or something that you don't know how to do, right? And how to sort of plan for that and time box it. And then, so I figure what I can do is I can either kind of come up with a feature or maybe a technology or maybe a stack and show you how I would implement that into an application. The second thing I could do is sort of is that I could just kind of cover that a little more quickly, and then we could just talk about ideas as a group and just sort of discuss like what one could do were one going to make a project. So, you want to see me implement something, or do you want to see me?
Like when you say implement, it's like how you would go about learning this new technology?
Yeah, and how I would go about, like, I have a project and how I'd go about implementing it into something. So we can either talk about that, or we can talk about kind of ideas and things and discuss sort of their merits in the frame of the 4 reasons and the other kind of planning. So who wants to kind of see me talk about the technology thing a little more? Who wants to kind of do project ideation? Okay. Okay. Well, then maybe I will do this how to do anything new thing, and then we'll just do a little bit of project ideation. Okay. So, how to do anything new. This is a, let's say you have a project going and you want to integrate Google Maps, right? You have a React app, you know how the React app stuff works, and you want to do some Google Maps stuff, right? But you don't know how Google Maps, you don't know how to do this, right? This is now a big, like, you don't know how long it's going to take you to put it in. Maybe it's easy, maybe it's not, maybe it's really difficult, maybe it's just plug and play. And you can't really, like, saying, oh, that'd be really difficult, we shouldn't do it, has as much danger as saying, like, oh, it'll be easy, and then it just kind of becoming a pain, right? So this is something I have to do all the time, where I have to kind of, if I don't know how difficult something is going to be, and I have to do an estimate, so what I do is, look, for it to be feasible, I would have to be able to do this in so much amount of time, right? That's kind of my level. So what I'm going to say is, I'm going to do an example. I have not done Google Maps in React before. Have I? No, I haven't. So I'm going to figure out, okay, so I have a React app. Let's just say I have a React app somewhere, and we're going to put Google Maps in it. So, I have no idea how long this is going to take. I have no idea what's out there. I have no idea what's available. Now, I have been in the industry longer, so I have a certain estimation that's like, look, there's probably a React Google Maps thing. So when it comes to especially bigger frameworks like React, Rails, Angular, Express, like there's a lot of stuff where it's like, there is probably someone has wrote an integration between these two things, whatever it is. Yeah. So I want to time box myself, and this is going to include looking up tutorials /libraries /demos YouTube, right? Finding out what's there. And then, but my, oh, sure, I can do that is not complete until I have a demo, until I can make a demo, right? And so I'm going to time box myself because obviously we have a limited amount of time in here. And I'm going to say it should take me 20 to 30 minutes to bring up a map with my area, and I want markers at the 2 Cartums locations. Are there 3 Cartums locations? I feel like there's just 2, right? So this is my again, this is aim small, miss small, right? I know exactly what it is I want to accomplish. So include a map with two markers for Cartums. For Calgary, Cartums is a, you've probably heard me talk about it like a bunch. It is a donut place in town that makes good donuts, but not the best donuts. I still think Lucky's is a better donut pound. Like, honestly, the Cartums apple fritter is just not as good. And I had a brie, not a brie. It was how did I say brie? Not brie. It's a creme brulee. That's what I meant to say. A creme brulee donut. It had like, kind of like glassy sugar on top and like a vanilla bean in the middle. It was just like a custard filling thing. It was just so, it was wonderful. But Cartums has a little more variety, so that's good too. So two markers for Cartums. Current location. I'm trying to think of anything else I'd want on the map. Maybe maybe special icons, right? And I'm going to say that this is, I have 20 minutes. So that's my time box. If I can get that done in this time, I know I'm going to be able to use it to do the things, right? I feel like that's an appropriate amount of time. For as much time as I want to spend on it, I feel like when you take that and then you scale up to the difficulty things, that's about correct. So that's kind of a good level. So let me, before I start my timer, really, I'm going to say React Google Maps. Oh, there's a full stack React, how to make Google Maps. Okay, read the documentation, read the source code. Cool. Still not going to commit myself to it, but there seems to be a couple of libraries. Google Map React. I can go to npm.js real quick. Check out Google Maps React. Oh, look, there are things. Let me do search there, see what kind of comes up. So there's a few of our what's-its. Sort by popularity. React Native Apps, Google Map React. This one seems to be the more popular one with 70,000 weekly downloads. Okay. That sounds like a thing. So this may be how I'm going to go with that. I'm going to read a few more things about Google Map React. This seems to be like, I guess I could do that. Bootstrap URL keys. Yeah. See it in action at JS Bin? I think I shall. It's in St. Petersburg, it's starting. Which is interesting. I was wondering if it was written by someone who's Russian. Yeah. So, any React component. They just made a React component, I guess. That was just to deal with some stuff. Okay, so this seems to have some of the things I need. I do need to, I think, get some keys, maybe? I guess we'll find out. Okay, so that is what I know I have to do. And as I'm looking at it, I might look back at this and be like, you know what, maybe special icons, but I think I want markers. I want to make sure I have dynamic markers. So maybe add a marker after 2,000 milliseconds. 10,000 milliseconds maybe? 5,000 milliseconds. That'd be good. Okay, so I'm giving myself 20 minutes. It's 10 o'clock. Let's start the clock. I can do this in Code Sandbox, or I can do this as a Create React app. I think I'm just going to do the Create React app. Create React app gmap demo. So this is really a WTF project. What's that for? Will that fail? I like that. Shut up. Makes me happy. All right. Create React app, gmap, what, WTF. And so now I'm just kind of setting myself up with some, like, not so much fake, but certainly just, artificial goals that I'll then turn into my real things I want them later. If I have something where it's like, actually I need directions, then maybe that's a thing that I would add. Is like, can I do directions between one place and another? Yarn add. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, let's do this React Google Maps. Let's pull the trigger on it. Okay, so let's yarn start. Introduction, usage and configuration. Oh, Google Maps style guide, very nice. Whew. So yeah, let me kind of introduction, installation. Yeah, this seems to be all I have to do. So let me go to gmap WTF here, source, app.js. Let me kind of clear some of this stuff out. I don't need the is marker shown. I just need that marker position. And I'm going to say export default my map component, right? And then, yeah, that'll work if I do that. Ugh, all right, okay, so that should be fine. I'm sure there's probably a localhost 3000 somewhere here that's, oh, right, because I have it over here. Did you wrap Google Map component with a Google Map HOC? What? Did you wrap Google Map component with Google Map HOC? What? Oh, there's a with Google Map that we have to wrap around it, apparently. Okay. I guess that makes a sense. They're doing a... Oh, okay. With Google Map. Okay. Oh, okay. Jeepers. This got serious. And they bring in recompose? Okay, I'm looking at this and this has got some weird stuff, right? What the heck is it? Seems like to do this, I gotta do like a bunch of weird things. I'm glad I tried a demo first to make sense of the fact that this has got a bunch of weird stuff. Let's add with script.js, see if that makes a difference. Is this thing less mad at me? Nope. Okay. So then I guess I have to say compose with props. Okay, so it wants me to bring in recompose. Let's just doing with props, right? Yeah. So maybe I can just take all this stuff. I think we're going to find out. I'm going to say okay, so let me just make these into consts. Const equals consts. I think I need to train this thing to, as soon as I say constant, rewrite it immediately to const. But yeah. Okay, const container element is this thing. Because the with props just means it's like, hey, it's going to kind of wrap this thing and put these props into it. So we're kind of cool there. Map element equals yada, yada, yada. Okay, and now I'm just going to say my component is all that stuff, but I'm also going to say props my map component props, and then wow, Google Map URL equals Google Map URL loading element equals loading element container element equals container element, and map element equals map element. Okay, well, okay. Good. It got me, indeed, in Australia. So that's good. So I guess I will put in whatever my current latitude and longitude is. Which for that, I mean, I know I have geo. It was like navigator dot geolocation is dot get current position is a function. Well, how does get current position work? So basically, I'm just trying to find out, okay, what's my current position? Can I do something with that? Oh, okay. I have to pass it a success thing. But that's still kind of within the scope of what I wanted to do. So here's the default center is this thing. So I guess what I want to say is, kind of want to pass in my own. And I wanted to make a marker show up after a certain amount of seconds, right? Okay, well, can I get React Google Maps style guide, Google Map. Let's take out the default center here. Let's see if that puts us in. That puts us in nowhere. So we need to have a center. Let's see, Gastown, latitude, longitude. This will at least get us to where we're supposed to be. It's apparently a thing. Default center equals latitude. That longitude is going to be that. And let's take off the marker for a moment. Apparently put me in North Korea. No, Mongolia. Put me in China, which is not. Maybe that needs to be negative longitude. That'll do it. Yes, I'm now in Vancouver. It's zoom 6. That's the opposite of how I wanted that to zoom. Let's do 12. Okay, it's better. Let's do 16. That is too much. So 14 does the trick. Yeah, that's about where I wanted. And I wanted to have a marker. At a position of, let's start with this. So I am getting myself into the right position. I am going to find that second cardams. Geocode, geolocation API. Okay, Google Maps platform. Places. I think I must have changed this around a bit, maybe. Yeah, but I really just want to find geocode for. Maybe let's go to Maps and search cardams. Let's go to the appender. And it is this. Copy. And measure distance. To here, from here. Measure distance. Directions. So let's get lat long from address. Address coordinates. Okay. .534 West Pender Street. Let's do that. Yeah, that'll do it. So marker position is that. Longitude is that. It's too many minuses. Okay, so that seems to be on Cardam's. Let me find the other one. It's the one on Main Street, which is that. Let's put it back into latitude, longitude. Yes. So we're going to add a marker here for that thing. I just realized I need to. Okay. And I think I might zoom this out to 12 again. And now we should be, okay, so there's our 2 donuts locations. Okay, so now I have accomplished a bit. I have 2 markers for Cardam's. I have the current location, maybe special icons. We might get to that in a second. And dynamic markers, maybe add a marker after 5,000 milliseconds. So one of the things I want about this is I want to be able to say, you know, like, what am I trying to say? I want this to be based on dynamic data. So let me go to my app.js here. Have all this other stuff. It's a little bit confusing, I feel. So what I'm going to pass in here is I'm going to assume that I'm going to get some props markers. And what I'm going to say is markers equals or marker data equals. I'm going to pass in some marker data. So const marker data equals, it's going to be an array. One thing is going to be name Cardam's Pender, and it's going to have location is going to be this thing, right? And then I want to have another one, name Cardam's main, location is going to be this thing, right? That makes sense. And I want to be able to pass this marker data here. And then here I want to actually generate a marker from each of these points of data. This.props.markerdata.map marker. And here I'm going to say, and the position is going to be marker.location, and obviously key equals marker.name for right now. That's unique, right? So now, when I look at my map, cannot read marker data of undefined. Not this dot props. Yeah, that's right. It is just, sorry, it says this dot props. I often make that mistake. It just has props. So usually if it says cannot find blank of undefined in React, a lot of times it's this, something wrong with this. But here we go. So okay, we loaded those dynamically, right? So what I'm going to say is, this right now is a, here's my function, right? So I'm going to say map, I'm going to make this a component, class map with markers, for whatever reason it has those markers, extends component. My constructor, yeah, props, super props. If I have, I'm not sure if I'm going to have any. You know what, I'm going to leave that be right now for, yeah, that's fine. Say this dot state equals marker data is all this stuff. And my render, for the time being, is so now I'm keeping track of it with state. Sorry, this should be this.state.markerData, right? Container elements, map elements, marker data, this.state.markerData. Your render mesh should have a return statement. Yes, it should. Return. And you'll notice this follows the container pattern because it just returns one thing that I'm passing everything to. Although I should probably move all that stuff in here too. Okay. Then, the one last thing I wanted to do was add another marker after little bits. So I'm going to say, good heavens, that's loud outside. I'm going to say on component did mount set timeout 5,000. This dot set state marker data is going to be it's going to be the old one, plus I'm going to add a new one, name Lucky's Donuts. Location is going to be Lucky's Donuts on main. There's that address. Address. Thought they'd never finish. Yeah, and here's my longitude. So now I have this extra marker. And what I'm basically saying is, hey, after 5,000 milliseconds, I want you to add a new marker to this, right? So that means, so let's try to reload this. 1 banana, 2 banana, 3 banana, 4 banana, 5 banana. Boom. See that? It's the third marker. So I have been able to cross off everything on my list in 23 minutes. So I feel like I can move forward with this. In fact, for me, I usually like set myself a few little steps. So an example of this, just recently, Sam asked me to do an iOS lecture. He's like, can you do a lecture on HTTP servers? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. He's like, can you do it in Swift? I do not know Swift. I've seen things with around, and it is kind of like, there's some things it has that's similar to JavaScript, certainly. But I was like, I haven't really dealt with this much. It's typed. I don't know its type systems. Type systems can be a pain if you don't know the type system. I think they're fantastic, but when you don't know it and you're getting used to it, it's another restriction, right? And I said, because there's a HTTP server written in Steam called Vapor. Not Steam, in Swift. Steam's a different thing. It's called Vapor. And I said, okay, well, tell you what, give me an hour. In a half an hour, I want to be able to return something. I want to be able to return some text that reflects a param I've been given it. And by the end of an hour, I want to be able to return a JSON of an actual object I create. If I can do those things by those time periods, then I feel like I'm going to be able to successfully do a lecture on it. Like it's going to be worth my time, right? And so I did, and I was able to accomplish both those things in that period of time. And Swift itself was weird, and there was things about it I had to figure out. But for the most part, I was like, okay, I get how this is working. I'm like, oh, I get how this is working. I had to go back to a few times to some of the students and be like, hey, do you know why this isn't working? And then we had to kind of work through why. But this is how I do things. Just working on the website for Lighthouse. We're doing a new registration thing, and one of the things you put in a registration code, and I wanted to do an HTML, like HTTP AJAX check to see if that's a valid code. So what I would do is, and I also want it to be like, it's not sending it every time that you type something, but if you type something and then pause for a second, I want it to go back and send something. So what I did is I end up creating, because I didn't know exactly how that would go, and I wanted to figure out that problem before integrating it into the rest of the application. I see, pens, view filter, private, error test. Yes, this thing. So what I wanted to do is there is only one valid option. So I'm not sure why this isn't. None of my stuff got saved. Oh, that's right, because none of my stuff got saved because everything. Okay, so anyways, but basically I set this stuff up, and then I just ran a small example of like, hey, can I get, if I do a jQuery thing, can I do an unbounce? Can I do a check? Can I make sure that if I send 2 requests and the first one finishes after the second one, but I want to only get the stuff in the first one, right? So I was able to kind of do that balancing and get them all to kind of enmesh, kind of work together. And that is, yeah, that is a pattern I still follow, and I suggest that you still follow now for the rest of your career. When you have something to integrate, make sure you actually spend some time figuring out how to integrate it into your application. Spend some time figuring out how to like make it work on its own and then integrate it. If you try to integrate it and it fails, there are 3 possible problems. Either it sucks and you're not using it correctly, or your app has a problem and that's not working, or the way that you put them together doesn't work. You know, if a body rejects an organ, it's either the body that's the problem, it's the organ that's the problem, or it's the way they're connected, right? So it's nice to check to see, hey, does this thing work on its own? And then you're going to, A, know that it works, know how it works, and when you integrate it, if you have a problem, you know, hey, actually this is more of an integration issue than it was. Moreover, you're more likely to integrate it correctly. So that is my key to integrating anything. If you find like, hey, we want to use a totally different stack, we want to use Vue.js instead of React, then okay. Then see if you can do how long it takes you to do the incrementer. See how long it takes you to do a to-do list that connects to an API. See how long it takes you to do those things, and based on that, you're going to have a good sense of how long it's going to take you to do like everything else. Yeah. And when it comes to choosing technologies, by the way, out of ones that you already have, there is something to be said for difficult, and there's something to be said for ease. So if you want to be like, hey, I'm not really familiar with Rails, this would be a good time to figure out how to use Rails. Yeah, absolutely. If you're like, hey, I don't know how to really use Rails very well. I know how to use Express well enough, and I think it'll be easier for me to do that, just so that I can get moving and I can get the front end that I want to have happen. Yeah, okay, do that too. That is fine. Either whatever it is that you want to do in that direction. Okay, so let's talk about project ideation really quickly. So, who's having trouble with a project idea, or who wants to kind of like talk about as a group ways that we could work with their project idea? Dudes in the back, what do you got? You got no project ideas?
No,
Like almost done that project.
project's almost done.
Typical, right? Jin's in the crib.
No.
Jin's captain.
Well, we had multiple ideas. One of the first ones was like a database sharing thing where we would like upload a database and have allow people to query the database online.
Okay, hold on. Because we're doing video here. So, yeah.
We're really doing it live.
Yeah.
Wait, so what do you want me to talk about?
The thing you just said.
Okay. So one of our first ideas, which we scratched, was a database sharing website where we would upload, where we would allow users to upload, say, like an Excel file or like a JSON file, and we would store it in a database, and then we would allow users to query the database, and then also share it, possibly place restrictions on what type of data or which tables, you know, they can share to other users, and that was pretty much it. We ran into some problems that when we were trying to plan out how we were allowing the user to query it, because we didn't want to simply allow users to just type in, you know, SQL into the browser, because it's the target audience was for people who don't know SQL, right?
Right.
So it was sort of like translating or allowing users to type like English or have like some sort of interface to allow them to query the database.
Almost like a domain-specific language.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Um,
I think you have a fantastic business model.
Yeah, but in terms of when we went through multiple ways of how to implement it, either through the interface or just like through like a little bar with like helpers that restrict what type of query that they can put in, there's just so much complexity to it, and also because like, we got into a loop of just like creating an interface, but then it's just like, okay, they can follow this, but then if they're following this, they know SQL. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So it kind of went into a loop, and then eventually that sort of translated into just a database visualization type project where we would allow users to upload JSON and then just, you know, allow them output like graphs and stuff however they want.
Right.
And then we scratched that as
Okay.
well.
All right. Well, so a few things. One is that like that's I've actually, yeah, my wife does admin stuff, and she's like I don't know if I would say an Excel power user, but definitely like always when she's doing Excel stuff, everyone else in her office is like, "How? You're a wizard." And so she's yeah, there is definitely some room to have things like this where it's, you know, you have some data like in the middle. If you are interested, by the way, you could look at Microsoft Access's Query GUI. My first kind of work as a, I'm going to get in front of the camera now. My first work as a developer had a lot of this, was actually me working on Microsoft Access. If you count me working as a, like people paid me money for me to do computery thingies that they couldn't do. And so if it comes to that, I managed a Microsoft Access database. And it had like a drag and drop to do queries, but it was very much like the drag and drop was just a layer on top of SQL. And it would be cool to do things that SQL itself couldn't actually do. So I do like the cut of your jib. If you're looking for something that would be interesting in that, you should look at the JSON query tool. Because again, it is typing, and it is like you can write a few things, but it also has like different sort of, like a few different languages for querying some JSON. And you could possibly make a GUI for one of them.
For JSON format only.
Yeah, for JSON format only. But like, I feel like JSON format's a good, you know, intro drug to the rest of them, right? Because I mean, yeah, that's another story entirely. All right, so what else? So like, what other ideas did you end up with? Are you still working on it, right?
We're still working on it right now. We're currently working on something with, we're using the WebRTC certain libraries, and we're trying to get in some sort of video streaming or peer-to-peer video streaming, and having like, it's like basically real-time Reddit where you have discussion boards and you also can have video chat as well in rooms, and then you can have like a, you know, maybe panel discussion while like everyone's chatting at the same time.
Yeah.
You can have different formats where it's just like one streamer, and then so it's pretty much like mainly for news and like you know how like everyone watches the news on YouTube, or
Right.
not as many people watch on TV, so it's just like sort of a central place for that, and
Very
you
cool.
can have like broadcasters there and just interactive chat as well.
Yeah, for like, because Reddit has the kind of Ask Me Anything.
Yeah.
So it could almost be an Ask Me Anything
Yeah, exactly.
thing. Yeah, I like it.
And most Reddit has like a link to a Discord channel.
Yeah.
So but then you have to go to an outside app, and it's not necessarily just for news.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. Anyone else? And feel free to like chip in on each other's what's it when you have a thought. Like, come on, gang, let's mix it up.
My team and I had a chat with
Yeah.
yesterday.
Yeah.
My team and I had a chat with Don yesterday, and we shared all of our ideas. And one thing he helped us realize is just the blind spots we had with our projects. And like for me, for example, I was really excited about having a sort of spritzer powered speed reader where you can take pictures of physical documents and then have that be fed through a spritzer, which if for people who don't know, it's just something that flashes full documents one word at a time for quick reading, and that doesn't affect your comprehension negatively at all. It actually helps a lot when it comes to reading things and saving time. So when I shared that idea with Don, he said that he really liked it, but it was also like a Star Trek futuristic kind of goal, because when it comes to text recognition by machines, it's a very, very difficult thing that even the best companies are struggling with at the moment.
Yeah.
So my question is basically, how do you deal with cool ideas that you have that are kind of like a little bit out of reach, but maybe, there's still something there that you could implement, but not like the full version of. Right?
Yeah. So that's a good question about like what you do when you have like, oh, this is a cool idea, but how do I get like, even how would I visualize to see if this is a thing that makes sense, or how would I get like a basic version? And so I find that with things like that, I have a lot of prototyping tools. Like React itself, like React plus Bootstrap especially, I find is an easy way to make a UI out of nothing in like minutes. So it'd be like, okay, I could have this thing, right? And when it comes to like visualization stuff, I have a tool called processing that I've used for a while that, for instance, I wanted to do, let me see if do I have processing up? Come on, buddy. Yeah. Processing file, open recent. So I saw you guys know the number file, that YouTube channel? So they're doing a thing about like, okay, you have a sunflower seed, and it pushes a seed out in one direction, right? And then it has to kind of turn and push a seed out in another direction. And they were talking about, okay, so what if they had this visualization and I wanted to recreate it? So I used something called processing, which is able to do sort of visual stuff where it's like, hey, I made a vector and then I made points, and I drew points on the thing, and I drew some text. So this is, what happens if I just do it right, like almost like going one around the circle, or just going in front of me. I just like, okay, one, right? Then this would be, this is kind of just right in front of me. I kind of put the next one and the next one and the next one. Okay, well, what would happen if I made it where I went halfway around the circle? So 1/2. Well, it's just like one out behind me, one in front of me, one in front of me. And I guess 3 would then be like that, where it's like I do this and then I do a third of it and then I do another third of it. And it's just these lines of seeds going out, but it's not a very good use of the space. So then the next question is, okay, well, what happens if I do like a fraction? Like 1.5, 3 halves. Well, you can see it's making 3 lines, so the numerator seems to matter. Okay, well, what if I make it just something slightly off of that? Well, it's still, because it's so close to 1.5, it still looks like these 3, even if they're radiating out. So I ended up, the thing that ends up happening is that a really great, this is 0.429, I think is 3/7. So then here's the golden ratio. And it's actually nicely spread out. And if you look at sunflower seeds, they actually use a number very close to this. Is that it is sort of super random in a sense. Or it's kind of more random where it kind of spreads out. And things form this sort of shape of this particular stretched out. And I thought, okay, so let me actually see what it looks like when these numbers sort of move. So I made this so that it would move that number and redraw all of these points based on that. And I was able to have that visualization. So when it comes to stuff like that, and here's a fun one. All right, so now we're up to 1.2, which is 6/5, right? And you can see there are 6 lines. We're going to work our way up to 1.25, which is 5/4. And what I kind of like about this is that I was able to really quickly visualize what was happening based on the thing that I wanted to see. So I think that with the optical character recognition example, what you're describing has a few parts to it, right? So if you just kind of want to have the experience of I click on something and then I have the text, okay. Well, you could sort of fool yourself in a few ways. So one thing is that you could click on it, you could make it appear as if that scanning was happening, and then you could give yourself a different kind of text that was preloaded in the machine. Or you could do optical character recognition, like go to an optical character recognition API, scan some text that you already know it's going to scan well, and then try that. And then the only real problem for you is whatever OCR optical character recognition framework you're using. So you can kind of pair things up, and if one thing doesn't work, you just pretend as if it did. Because what does optical character recognition do? It takes in an image and it spits out text. So why don't you just write a function that takes in an image and spits out text, and then run that text through your spritzer? So when it comes to stuff like that, this is kind of what I do, is I sort of I make it look like part of it works. Or I do something that's like, this isn't how I would do this last thing, because the next step I kind of wanted to have here was, there's more steps I wanted to put on this particular visualization. But when I was doing game development in school, I would often lay out 3D things or 2D things in this environment, just because it was easy for me to move things around, because I got used to it, and then do something else. And I guess, yeah, what I'm saying is kind of you just sort of work on your prototyping tools. And then you also say, look, I have this and this and this and this, and I want them all to work together, but this part doesn't work. Well, what you can do is you can basically carve out a section around it. It's supposed to take in an image, and it's supposed to spit out text. Well, I will put in different text. Things like that. And so with that, I mean, for final project, you want it to actually work. But again, for the presentations themselves, you have control. You're kind of like a magician, right? You have control. You can call someone out from the audience. No one knows that it's Confederate, right? So you have the ability to say okay, we're going to scan some text. If you have confidence, that's when you can be okay, somebody who has some text. And then you do something. But that is part of what you have, is that you can, at least for your own development, cut out a section, the hardest section, and just kind of put a placeholder in there that answers the contracts. Actually, there's another thing I wanted to point out about that idea of contracts, idea of API, is that while you're working with each other, if you are working on, especially if you're doing the horizontal slices, contracts matter. So if you have a point where 2 bits of code talk to each other, you need to make sure that they are, if you have 2 programs talk to each other, you need to make sure that the way that they're supposed to interact with each other is set, where your API, your AJAX call should query your API in a way that actually exists. You know what that endpoint should do under any given circumstance, right? It needs to be reliable. It needs to match up with that. Your database, when you write database calls, let's say you're using connects or you're using whatever, they should match up to the tables that you have and the data things that are in them, right? If you're writing something that doesn't have, it just needs to match. That's just the end of it. You do probably want to make your tech, like all of your stuff, match the data shape that you have, and that data shape should be there for the ERD, should be in the database, should match for your queries. It should probably match for your API, although you could massage that as you see fit. And that's how it looks on your front end. You can do format, be like, oh, I called it check code instead of code check. Okay, that's fine. But make sure that you understand you're getting it from the API as check code. You have to transfer it. Or you say like, guys, we wrote it down on the API endpoint as this. So when you write those down and work to contract, and like you be like, okay, this is how we're going to work together, then you can kind of, you don't really want to work in a silo, but you do want to be able to say like, I can build my entire front end and pretend that I'm talking to an API until it's ready with promises, with just delayed promises. And that gives me what I need. But at the end of the day, I need to connect them. And I need to make sure that they connect with what we said they'd connect with. So good contracts make good teams. So when you want pieces of software to work together, that's a really important part. I was just talking with an alum the other day, and we were talking about this process of like making things, and part of it was like it was a React app, and they were fitting a function over here to a function over here, and they were like, I'm not sure how to add these together. I'm like, well, you just pass this function. And there was such anxiety on their part about, yeah, but will this function work? I'm like, well, it doesn't have to work on this side. You just sort of take it and trust that it works. And on this side, you just make sure to provide it and trust that it gets called at some point. Like part of the contract of like passing things along is, I'm sure this will get called there, and I'm sure this will get called there, as long as you know that they work. And so not only does good contracts really help you make sure stuff works, but it also reduces your own cognitive load. You don't have to worry about whether or not things will work. They'll work. It's fine. All you have to do is just start making the stuff. So if you want any more information on this, by the way, I'm going to be talking about it at the next Work Together Friends, which is on Thursday. It's tomorrow. Work Together Friends. It's a kind of alumni get-together to which you guys are certainly invited because you'll kind of be at a good level for it. And I'm going to be talking about how I make stuff with this thing. This is, yeah. And how to, yeah, it's just a quick, easy way to make fun, interesting, creative coding and digital art. Yeah. Okay, I think that's all I have. If I don't have any questions from Calgary, and I, don't, that'll be it. Good luck. I'll send these notes out soon. Talk to you guys later.